Could you tell us what you think about President Trump's decision to only keep the U.S. in the nuclear deal for another 4 months unless these main 4 conditions are met?
I think it's a very good move because this deal is a disastrous deal. It's a terrible deal. President Trump was aware of that before he came into office, and ever since he came into office, he's trying to change the deal. And he makes it clear for everybody that if he is not going to be able to change the deal, he's going to leave the deal. And by that, actually put the deal to an end. And he's giving a chance to the other partners to this deal to join him in an effort to fix the terrible mistakes done by concluding this deal. And he's pointing to the fact that this deal is actually paving the road for the Iranians to have an arsenal of nuclear weapons in 13 years now. This is totally unacceptable for him and for everybody. And the purpose of this deal was to enable Iran to overcome the difficulties it had on its way to have a first nuclear weapon by allowing it to have a wide arsenal of nuclear weapons in a later time, not within a short period of time. But the problem was that the Iranians were not able to reach the first weapon anyhow. There was a threshold that was uncrossable for Iran. And now this threshold has disappeared, and instead the way to a wide arsenal of nuclear weapons was paved for them. President Trump understands it. He's going to put an end to it. And he's going to insist on the deal will not allow Iran to develop missiles, ballistic missiles. He's going to insist on that the deal will be changed in a way that it will not have a sunset element in it. That the deal would force the Iranians to take upon themselves a real monitoring. Right now, there's no monitoring. The monitoring is a fiction.
Well, why do you think that the United States' main European allies, who are partners of this agreement, are so reluctant to go along with these new conditions and actually see more value in this agreement than the United States does?
Well, first of all, I think it's a matter of admitting that you made a mistake. No leader would like to admit that he made such a terrible mistake. Like, it's a Chamberlainian mistake. Nobody would like to admit it. Secondly, they are very eager to make business with Iran. But the problem is that if the United States pulls out of this deal and reinstate the sanctions, the Europeans will face a situation where they will have to choose between making business with Iran or having trade with the United States. Obviously, they will prefer the United States. This is the reason, by the way, everything is here interconnected. This is the reason why they didn't invest. They just made some preliminary steps towards the Iranian economy, but they did not really invest in the Iranian economy because they were always cautious until President Trump makes up his mind. And this brought about the failure of the Iranian deal from the point of view of the Iranian population. The expectations didn't materialize because everybody was waiting for President Trump. And now it's clear that he's not going to go along with this idea of let's be friends of Iran and enable Iran govern the Middle East and enable Iran to have a nuclear arsenal. He's not going for that. And you know what? All kinds of other things that he's doing recently makes his message very clear and sound. Because unlike his predecessor, he believes in red lines. So when he told the Palestinians, listen, I'm going to cut money for UNRWA, he actually did it. When he said, I'm committed to recognizing Israel as Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, he actually did it. So everybody has to take his word very seriously.
Well, how do you think Trump's messages, President Trump's messages, are being received in Israel by the Israeli government? And how closely aligned is the Israeli view of Iran with the United States?
I think very close. We in Israel think that we are not against the deal. We want a deal. We don't want to see escalation. But we want a deal that stops Iran from having a nuclear weapon, not a deal that paves the road for the Iranians to have a nuclear arsenal that would then be translated into total instability in the Middle East, and the Middle East being run by the radical Iranian regime. That's not what we want, and that's not what everybody else should want. And in this respect, Israel and the United States stand in the same place. under Trump. It was not the case under Obama. We were in harsh contradiction under Obama on that issue.
What do you think Israel and the United States are going to do going forward to better ensure, from their perspective, that Iran doesn't have a path to a bomb in 12, 13 years?
Well, first of all, if necessary, if the Iranians would not allow, and this is their position right now, a change in the deal, and that would mean that the United States would pull out of the deal, then the first step would be the resumption of the sanctions. And the resumption of the sanctions is a clear message to everybody. There is a price for trying to have a nuclear weapon and insisting on having a nuclear weapon. There is a heavy price you're going to pay, and the Iranians already know what this price is. They already suffered from this price. So it's something that, especially with the riots that were taking place in Iran recently, the protests, it's very clear that the Iranians don't want to go back there. So it's a clear price and a message that a very efficient tool that can be used. And on top of that, I think what is also true is, and this was true for some extent also with President Obama at the time, that when Obama was in power, he always said what we need to do is to make sure that Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapon. Trump has changed the message. In his recent announcement regarding the next 4 months additional time, he said what we have to make sure is that Iran doesn't have the capability to produce a nuclear weapon. That's exactly what we think. We should keep Iran away from having the capability to produce a nuclear weapon, because if they have the capability, they will produce it.
Are there any areas in which the United States and Israel still differ, even a little bit, in how to approach Iran's nuclear program?
No, I think right now we see it eye to eye. We see it eye to eye. We are trying to fix this deal so as to make sure that this deal guarantees that Iran will not be able to have a nuclear weapon. And if worse comes to worst and we cannot fix it, then we are ready to see the nixing of the deal. That is the position of the Trump administration. This is our position as well. And we hope that with the support of Arab pragmatic states, with everybody putting their efforts together, we shall be able to convince the Europeans to support this policy. I mean, I don't think anybody has big expectations from the Russians and the Chinese, but maybe the Europeans will reconsider, because until now they are stuck somewhere just because they're afraid to say that they made a terrible mistake. Is that a justification to make even a bigger mistake? The Europeans should wake up. And if they do, then Congress, together with the Europeans, can come up with some ideas of how to renegotiate the deal and what should be the real goals, and do it from a position of strength. I mean, President Obama was in a wonderful position of strength after putting the sanctions, but he was so committed to having a deal at any price that the Iranians immediately understood his weakness and made a wonderful deal for themselves. And from the negotiations should have been conducted in a totally different way. Because one of the terrible elements in this deal is that none of the facilities that are part of the Iranian nuclear deal and the Iranian nuclear program was taken away from the Iranians. Everything is still there.
Well, how do you think Israel and the U.S. could prevent Iran from dashing to nuclear
what
capability?
Should be clear is that, and should be reminded to the Iranians, and this time in a more convincing way, because when Obama did it, nobody was convinced, is that all options are on the table. Beware, all options are on the table. And it should be clear to the Iranians that they take a risk if they try to do something like that. So this is one issue that we have to discuss, which is what's going to happen if the United States decides to pull out. The second thing that we have to discuss is what do we do about the growing influence of Iran in the Middle East. The Iranians managed to use their resolution in order to pave this corridor from Tehran to the Mediterranean through Iraq and Syria. They control Syria. They try to turn Syria into some sort of an Iranian state out of Iran. and they can do whatever they want. We see all the weapons coming through. We have a common interest with the Americans to put an end to this phenomenon.
What do you think the U.S. And Israel are doing and will do to counter the Iranian influence in places like Syria?
So we are on our side are doing everything in order to prevent Iran from using Syria for their purposes. And definitely to prevent them from using it against our interest. So we made it clear that we shall not allow an Iranian base next to our borders in the Golan Heights. We made it clear that we shall not allow the Iranians to use the Syrian territory in order to deliver advanced weaponry to Hezbollah. And we made it clear that we shall not tolerate Iranian bases in Syria.
And what do you think the United States, how do you think the United States sees that Israeli position?
I think the United States understands it fully and support it. But the question is, what is the United States going to do about the presence of Iran and the influence of Iran in Syria beyond those three issues that we take care of ourselves? And so far we haven't seen enough American determination to do what needs to be done in order to prevent Iran from having a base in Syria and having influence in Syria. We saw the Americans supporting the forces fighting against ISIS, but not supporting the forces fighting against Iranian presence over there. And as a matter of fact, recently the Americans have cut some of the aid they gave to some of these groups. So if nothing is going to be done, the Iranians will be able to really establish this and strengthen and widen the corridor that allows them to go underground from Tehran to Lebanon. This is something that it is up to the Americans to take care of that, to make sure this is not happening, and through their ongoing discussions with the Russians, they have to make sure that this doesn't happen.
As you know, the Iranian presence in countries like Syria, its involvement in conflicts outside of Iran was one of the complaints that many protesters in Iran had recently when they marched on the streets in late December and early January. What is your assessment of these protests now that they have somewhat died down?
Well, yeah, I think that, first of all, we can see that everything is interrelated. And this involvement in Syria costs a lot of money. Keeping Assad in power costs a fortune. Supporting Hezbollah costs a fortune. Supporting Hamas in Gaza costs a fortune. And so on and so forth. The Houthis in Yemen, everything costs a lot of money. And since not enough money is coming in after the agreement, the pressures, the economic pressures on the people of Iran are growing. All the promises of Rouhani for better life and more freedom and things like that were not translated into any kind of reality. So the people of Iran are very frustrated, and they show it by going to the streets in a very courageous manner in order to protest against the regime, because they hate this regime. And of course, this support to terror groups and to the supporters of the radical Iranian interpretation of Islam around the Middle East is something that is totally against what the people of Iran thinks an appropriate, thinks to be ready to accept as an appropriate and acceptable policy. And that's why they're protesting against it, because the billions of dollars invested in all these efforts are missing when you want to solve the problems of the Iranians themselves in Tehran and in Durud and all these other places.
The Iranian government has been saying that it basically successfully quashed and ended this protest movement. They had lots of security personnel in the streets. They brought many of their own supporters out onto the streets. They stopped opposition people from using social media apps to communicate. So what do you think are the prospects for a continued protest movement in Iran, given what the government has done?
I think that they did not manage to stop the real power of this protest, because the power of the protest is in the mind and the hearts of the people that were ready to take the risk and go to the streets. They knew what kind of a danger they are in. And even if they decided to stop it for a while, the readiness to go on with it is there. It's a matter of conditions. And whereas at this point of time, this movement sort of surprised everybody, I think next time people may be more prepared for something like that because it's not going to be a surprise anymore. And so I don't think they managed to do anything beyond just putting a cap over it. And this cap is going to explode and disappear at a certain point. And it's not going to be a repetition of what happened, it's going to look differently. Because the people hate this regime and they don't want it. These people are good Muslims and they're good Iranians. But they do not accept the specific interpretation of Islam of these radical mullahs that rule them, and the idea of Vilayat Faqih. They want to be able to govern themselves. And that's what they're trying to achieve. Freedom, that's what they're looking for. And the quest for freedom is not going to be stopped just because forces were present in the streets. We saw many cases, by the way, during this protest where the people were chasing the forces of the regime that were there to stop them. That was the extent of courage that these people had. And in the end of the day, this protest has made a mark on the Iranian political scene, on the Iranian regime. Everybody now knows that the people of Iran don't support this policy of the regime. Everybody knows now that the people of Iran hate the regime. They want to change it. Everybody knows that. And under this new situation, it's going to be very difficult for the Iranians to keep the situation as it is. We saw similar things in the Soviet Union at the time. We saw when you try to impose a lack of freedom on the people, eventually you're going to fail and fall. And I think this is clear. And the insistence of the regime, instead of listening to the people, to stick to the nuclear project that costs fortune as well, to stick to supporting terror around the world. We just saw this group of Iranians being looked upon in Germany in the recent days. They support terror around the world. They support terror in the Middle East, of course. This policy does not get the support from the people of Iran. And eventually, sooner or later, and I think now that the West has seen the potential, it's going to be more or better prepared to communicate with this kind of movement in the future.
Well, what about the Israeli government when they look at these protests and they assess the impact or the potential longevity of this protest movement? You know, how hopeful do you think Israel is that this could result in real change, or do you think Israeli leaders are a little more circumspect?
No, I think you saw Prime Minister Netanyahu speaking out in favor of this protest, and we definitely don't have anything against the people of Iran. We like the people of Iran. We appreciate the people of Iran. We are very much respecting the culture of the Iranians. We are looking forward to have better relations with the Iranian people, and we wish them success. Of course, Israel, with all due respect, is not a force that can do something significant about it. It's up to the West. But to the liberal forces around the world, these are the forces that should be there for the people of Iran in support. Unfortunately, the Europeans have shown themselves to be a very weak base for support. So it goes back again to the United States, the only power in the world that was there for the Iranian people when they were going out to the streets. And it's very important, at least this time, unlike 2009, somebody was there for them. And they understand the difference and the change that has taken place. And I believe that all kinds of changes will take place under the understanding that there is this force, this potential force in Iran that will make a new wave look different.
Yossi Kuperwasser, thank you so much for speaking to VOA's Persian service. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.